I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 250 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. So welcome back. This is another summer episode. And as I mentioned last time, I'm going to do a couple of episodes a little more freestyle than usual and maybe a little more personal as well. And this one is no exception. So I am really looking forward to sharing with you some reflections from my family reunion experience this summer. And I want to give you a little bit of background on the history of this family reunion, which is connected to my mother's family, and then share some of the stories and things that happened, and then maybe a couple of insights or conclusions that I was reflecting on after driving the long drive home from this reunion and thought it might spark something interesting in you as you listen. So this family reunion that I went to this summer had its real inception 46 years ago. So the first time that this reunion was held was 1976, and I was like about 18 months old. I was the youngest person at that reunion, which is a little fun family tidbit that people like to throw around. And then they were held roughly every 3 years. Sometimes they got a little bit off schedule, but roughly every 3 years since then. And I was thinking back, it started with my great-grandparents on my mother's side and their descendants. So it would have been my grandmother's, my mom's siblings, their spouses, their children, and then ultimately their grandchildren. And that was a pretty big group of people. And the very first reunion was held on the property where my mom grew up. So my grandmother and grandfather had lived on that property for years. It's the family farm in Pennsylvania, and it's where my mom and her siblings grew up. And so I've been going there since I was born, right? That was my grandmother's house. And so it's a place that's really kind of special to me. And so it made sense. It's always made sense to me to have reunions there. They haven't always been held there, but they have been many times over those years. And that's also where this one was. So it was kind of back in the setting where it had been at that very first reunion in 1976. This time was the first time that it was scaled back to just my grandmother's family, her descendants. So as families grow, right, as these things happen, every one of those families has gotten so big that they essentially can have their own reunions and we can have ours. And so this was just my mom's siblings and their children and their grandchildren. So that's one thing that I think is really kind of interesting and that I cherish about this is how long-standing the tradition has been. And it's a very simple format. The way this family does it is very like country fun. It is very simple. So everybody arrives typically on Friday night, and there's a little bit of a pre-gathering, and then there's a long day on Saturday from kind of morning till night, and then some years, there's also a gathering on Sunday. So this year, that was the format as well. When I was thinking back on some of the like really poignant memories about this longstanding tradition, one of them that people tell the story all the time was the very first year, so 1976, my grandparents were like their siblings and that generation participated in this kind of, I don't know what to call it, like a silly fashion show. So they had these like costumes that were all rooted in puns. Like, let's say someone was being introduced as like, and here comes the toast of the town. And this person would come out in kind of this dress, like with literal pieces of toast, like glued all over it. So I cannot imagine what humor was like in the mid 1970s. Apparently this was all the rage. And it makes sense if you think about things like the Carol Burnett show and some of that more slapstick comedy. But the people who remember that reunion, laugh hysterically when they remember these rather serious, kind of older generations who they apparently talked into participating as the models in this fashion show. So that is one story that gets told a lot. The other one that I remember was the year I was about 9 years old, and someone had the wonderful idea to do wheelbarrow races. But here's the twist. The concept was there was an actual wheelbarrow involved, and you put spouses together. So I think in most cases, you had the woman in the wheelbarrow and her husband pushing her, and he was blindfolded. So she was supposed to give directions verbally around like a sort of relatively simple obstacle course and race other people back to the finish line. And that is another one. I have vague memories of that, but the laughter that ensues when people remember that, and there is video evidence of that one by then, really was just like kind of, it's a high point of things that people talk about for years and years and years and years. There was one year where there was some sort of egg toss, and I remember a lot of egg yolk breaking on people. I think we moved away from anything that messy at some point. My personal sort of most nostalgic memory of this tradition is the year that I was 16. And apparently that year, the reunion was held in Michigan. So some of this family lived in Michigan and some in Pennsylvania. And so that particular year it was in Michigan. And at 16, apparently I took my summer job quite seriously and did not want to miss a shift that I was signed up for at the restaurant where I worked. So my mom and dad agreed that I could fly from Pennsylvania to Michigan by myself, apparently, and they were going to drive, and I would meet them in Michigan like a day later or 2 days later than everyone else. So, I mean, when I look back on this story, I cannot believe this because I now have a child that age, and I cannot imagine like ending up in this situation. So I worked my shift, and my mom had forgotten. She either forgot or decided to leave homemade cinnamon rolls that she was planning to take for like breakfast on the first day of the reunion. So she asked me if I would put them into some big shopping bags, like, the kind with handles, and take them as a carry-on on the plane with me. And I agreed. I don't know. Again, this seems ridiculous, but that is that. So I put these cinnamon rolls into the car. I drive to the airport, which was like maybe 45 minutes away from our house. I park my car, everything's going very smoothly until the flight gets delayed. And then it gets delayed again. And then it finally takes off and I get to Philadelphia, which is where I have a connecting flight to Michigan. And I get as far as Philadelphia and the flight is canceled. So now I am in Philadelphia at the airport. My parents are in Detroit at the airport. We have no cell phones because this is the early 90s. And I'm going to have to spend a night in a hotel with my cinnamon rolls. So that's exactly what happened. The airport, we eventually connect with my parents through like the airline employees. I get put on a shuttle along with other passengers. We go to this hotel and I spent the night there. And then I got on the plane the next morning and my parents picked me up at the airport in Michigan. So when I think about my experiences at the reunion, like that is the one that stands out because I still can't believe that that's how that story went down. Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. And then this year at 47 was the first one that was just my grandparents' descendants and again, back on this same beautiful piece of property, this family farm in central Pennsylvania. And this farm is like, this is the middle of nowhere, right? It is difficult to get cell service. It's really not findable on GPS, which I learned the hard way on this trip because we stayed at a hotel a little bit out of town because there's no hotels right there. And my husband and my kids and I are going to drive in. And I asked for the GPS address, which, my mom's like, I don't even think there is one, but somebody finally gave me this address. And then it took us to the wrong town because apparently there's the same address, but in another one of these kind of nearby small hamlets. So we end up 20 minutes away, which everyone got a good laugh out of my inability to follow directions to a location I will remind you I've been going to since I was born, right? I never claimed to be good at having a sense of direction. So it's a very precious tradition to me, that this family continues to gather, and watching these, now adults with their own children who I remember being babies and children. That reunion when I was 16 with the cinnamon rolls on the airplane, 2 of my sweet girl cousins were babies in playpens, at that. And they are both mothers. And so it's such a amazing journey to watch this family kind of go through its evolution, and there are a couple of traditions that are really part and parcel of the way we do this as a family. One of them, I mentioned some of these silly games, and I kind of bristle a little bit every time we try to play one of these games. There have been softball games and volleyball games over the years, but they really, it does get everybody sort of out of their comfort zone a little bit, and a lot of laughter typically ensues with these games. There's also a really important tradition that is an auction, and the auction is used to raise money to pay for the reunion. So it started with a tradition of people bringing things that they made. And then it just becomes a lot of fun with people that you love bidding against each other and kind of bidding up these very simple items. And I remember, I think it's probably that same year that I was about 9, maybe the next one, I did a cross-stitch pillow, very simple, kind of design. And my godparents were both there and just bidding against each other. And I can't even remember what this pillow went for, but some absurd amount of money that just delighted me, and made me feel so loved and so special. And that, of course, has carried on with many things that are sort of, they're not family heirlooms, but they're special sentimental things within the family that people may have acquired and then bring to the reunion. There's often homemade things, whether it's a special baked good that everybody loves and that person might bring it, or this year somebody brought they had done a lot of canning with things like hot peppers and made salsas and stuff, and that's always super popular. So that idea of getting everybody together for both a silent auction and then also a short live auction it's become such a tradition, and it's gone on. I don't remember when the first one was, but very early in the evolution of this reunion, the auction made its debut, and my uncle Fred, who has since passed away, was the very capable and very fun auctioneer. So he held such a cherished position in that auctioneer role for so many years. And I think, I was reflecting on this when we were driving back. We drove 7 hours to get there and then 7 hours back. So there's plenty of time to talk about this. And, when you're staring down that drive with 3, tweens and teens, and it's hot and it's a packed car, it's easy to get in your head about God, is this even worth it? What are we doing? And it really is every single time worth it to me to go have that experience of reconnecting with these people. We didn't do it during the COVID years, and I'm just so glad to be back in this tradition. And of all the things, the auction, the food, there's so much good food, the games, the most important thing to me is the conversations and the opportunity to just sort of, meander from person to person over the course of those 2 days-ish and have a meaningful conversation about what's going on in their life. And, we're all connected on social media. We all have texting. There's ways for us to see snippets of what's going on, but there's just no replacement for looking into the eyes of someone who shares, your lineage, and you can see it in their faces. You can see it in their posture. You can see just those characteristics that are shared among family members, not to mention the shared experiences that you've held over decades and decades of growing up together. Watching the 3 generations that were present at this reunion, my grandparents have since passed on. So my mom and her siblings, and then my generation, and then our children. Right now, that's what we've got, is those 3 generations just intermingled, and everyone sort of holding everyone else's babies and helping get food on the table was such a blessing. And I left with a really full heart and feeling very grateful that this family takes the time to do that. and that it's meaningful. You know, my cousin who's in her 30s picked up the torch for this reunion to really run the planning of it. She has 2 really young kids, and it's a lot of work to put one of these together. So I guess if there's any takeaway for you listening, you know, do you do something with your family like this? Do you have a tradition that this whole episode has kind of made you smile and think about what's similar and what's different to your own? You know, do you all go to the beach together? Do you have a place at the lake that everybody gathers? Like, what is the character of the family gathering in your family? And if you don't, would it be interesting to bring people together, to start that tradition, to see what it opens up for the relationships among the people? And is it something that could be sustained? In this case, it's going to be 50 years the next time we get together. And that's, it won't be 50. We'll do it sooner than that, but we're coming up on 50 years. And I think when you think about the ability to start something that has a legacy impact like that, I think that's pretty special. So if it's not something that already exists in your family, maybe it's something that you want to consider. And remember, every single thing I shared today is so simple. There's nothing in here that was fancy. There's nothing in here that was elaborate. There's a lot of shared sort of potluck nature to this. And I think those are the best, because the focus stays where it belongs, which is on the people and on the relationships and the conversations. And that's the good stuff. All right, those are my reflections from my family reunion this summer. Till next time, my friends, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.